Yeah, there's definitely a ton of value in watching all the simulated fights that people do during the courses, and it builds a mental Rolodex of possibilities that I'm always adding to. So if I say I don't see that happen often, I have some data behind that, thousands of simulated
Yeah.
fights where I'm leaning on when I say something. Um, but more so than the simulated fights that I see is just the vastly different cultures across the country. I mean, accents are different, obviously, but the way people interpret stuff, the way they look at each other and interact, it is so different across the country. And even within the small areas or the states themselves, the city is different than the suburbs, different than the rural areas. It's really interesting. I've had a, a lot of fun getting to know the country, you know?
I can
Hmm.
imagine. Yeah, and we have that over here too. I mean, one of my students, he's a black guy. He's bigger than me. He's a really big guy, former soccer player, professional, and so on. So he's big,
Yeah.
and strong, and and we often talk after class, and he will routinely step too close as he's talking, and that's just. And we talked about it, and I told him once, like, look, you have to understand that, I know you don't mean any harm by doing this, but you are making me extremely uncomfortable because you're blocking my good arm. You're flanking me, and I know you don't mean to do that, but there's like a lot of stuff in my brain going like alert, 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 mayday, mayday, and I can't hit you for that. But you should understand that this is how it can be interpreted. And he's like, are you kidding, coach? It's like, nope, I'm not kidding. And I explained to him, showed him a bunch of videos, like I've been sharing on my Instagram, truckloads of videos of actual incidents. Like, this is what happens, closing the distance, setting up the sucker punch, all that kind of stuff. And, you know, and he said, but this is in my culture. This how we talk. I'm like, I know. And that's why I'm not upset with you at all. And we're good. But I want to make sure that that this is how other people um, might interpret this. And we talked about, we've got many, many different ethnic backgrounds in Belgium and especially in the Brussels and Antwerp area. And he grew up there as well. So he knows, what that's like. So, yeah, okay, those guys, this is how they talk. And like a lot of talking with the hands. I'm like, and for me, if I see you talking with your hands all the time, I'm going to take a step back and I'll be like, okay, it's fine, dude. And I'll just be relaxed. But all these different things trigger responses with people in a different way.
Videos all the time about distance management, and you can't let someone get within a wingspan. If they can touch you or you can touch them and they make the first move, your chances of mitigating that initial assault is basically zero, right? Surprise attack. I mean, anyone can
Yeah.
get got, but we'll put videos up talking about how can you manage distance without being weird or a jerk, and people will say that's why you never let anyone get that close. And just it speaks to their small world that they live in. Some people have to ride on a subway every day, and they're holding that hanger, and they're right next to someone all day long who they don't know every day. Maybe you're at in
Yeah.
line at the grocery store to get groceries. Are you going to stand 4 feet away from the person in front of you? Probably you don't. Most people don't. They're all basically crammed together. Sometimes you can't just never let anyone get that close. It's always frustrating when you see some of the comments. It's the same as the just run people. That's why you just run. That's the
Yeah.
first thing in self-defense. Just run. Well, what if you're broken or you're old and fat and you can't just run anymore, or you have a kid with you, or there's a car in the way, you're in a elevator. Sometimes you can't just run. It's such a lazy a lazy answer that people throw out. It sounds good. Not always the reality though, right?
Uh, exactly. And this is one of those issues that is so difficult to, um, make people understand. And for me, it all boils down to the fact that you look at anything, whatever the field is. I don't know, could be, computers. You can study all the way through university, get a degree in this and that, and only understand a part about it. Could be AI, could be medicine, and so on. You have to study for years and years and years, and then keep training to stay up to date. But when it comes to violence, Everybody knows how it works. Everybody knows like, okay, this is
Uh,
what you need to do, and so on. And then you have like a professional who's like, well, actually, I've been through this shit, and I teach people how to survive. It's like, and actually, it's more complicated than that. No, 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 because I know a guy, and what he did was that move, and I'm like,
my
okay,
one anecdote
okay,
solves the solution for every single problem that could ever exist. It's I saw John Wick, so I know what to do. All right, sure, ninja, I get it. Nothing can ever stop you. We actually we don't get those people in our class. Those people don't show up to a class where they're going to get tested and put through a validation exercise to see if what they just did works or
yeah,
not. Those guys are generally afraid to actually test out their self-defense. They want to live in the fantasy world that their their swoopy arm movements are just going to keep them protected no matter what, or they'll just run.
yeah. And this is one of the things that I like. I mean, let's talk a little bit about
Hmm.
ShivWorks and everything. For the people who have been living under a rock for the past 20 plus years, and we talked about this just before we started recording. You're a full time instructor with Craig Douglas, and I remember I started following Craig when he was in I was the defend.net
Yeah,
forums
man.
like 20 plus years ago. One of
Yeah.
those forums, and
That
again, it's been too
CPI
long,
forum.
so I forget. Yeah, 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 yeah. Yeah. So and he was very active there undercover. And I remember talking to my mentor about it, Lauren Christensen, because he was still on the force then. I said, look, what this guy's doing, what do you think? He's like, yeah, he knows his shit. Um, and I'm like, okay, I'll keep following this guy. So from a distance, I followed Greg and his work. And what I really like about what you guys are doing is just like you said, it's testing. Okay, here's a drill. Well, let's gear up, go.
Yes.
And there's parameters to the drill, and there's goals and safety and all those kind of things. But it's like just do it
Yeah.
now. And the guy is resisting. He's not helping you. So could you talk a little bit about how you got to work with Craig? How did you end up being a full
Yeah.
instructor
So
there?
just for those who don't know, Craig did 21 years on the job. Two of those years were just in a strictly undercover capacity. The majority of his time was spent doing narcotics or SWAT or both at the same time. And then he started doing ShivWorks. Um, I'll let him say why. It's a hilarious story. He didn't want to go and train the general public, but he needed money to pay for a wedding. And so a friend of his convinced him to do one class, and he said he beat up these just normal people for almost 13 hours straight. And at the end of it, they were still had smiles on their faces. And he was like, "Man, this is way more fun than teaching cops." And that's what got him started doing it. But flash forward till about 2.5 years ago, I was a cop in San Diego. I had about 7.5 years on whatever people think about California. It's a lot worse than what they have pictured in their head, especially from the law enforcement perspective. So I quit, moved to Florida, called up Craig, told him I don't have a job. Can I tag along with you teaching? And he said, sure. So for a year, I just did a mentorship program with him. I didn't make any money, just traveled with him and did as many classes as I possibly could. I think the first full year, I had 56 different classes with like 1,000 hours of him actually watching me instruct and evaluate people during the scenarios. And and then after that, I got hired on full time as his first employee for ShivWorks. And I do own a jujitsu gym. That's where we are here in Clearwater, Florida. But I travel full time with him, teaching every weekend. We just did a private class for a client we have in Pennsylvania. Got back yesterday. Before that, we were in Alaska, Washington, then Alaska, went to Virginia. So it's constantly going to these different places. And it's about a 50-50 spread between open enrollment classes to the general public where anyone can sign up and military, law enforcement, or government classes that are closed. Like next week, starting Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, we have a class at the east side of Florida, and that's for law enforcement. And then we have a few federal agents in that one. And our big focus is everything that can happen from 0 to 5 feet. That's our niche. That's what we focus on. We don't teach people how to shoot. We teach them how to adapt shooting to a very specific problem of grounded or standing entangled fights. And how do you put rounds in the other guy, not put rounds into yourself when you're actually touching someone, or send rounds off into the general public at a horizontal angle where you hit the person who's not involved. We've seen a few of those videos come out lately, and it refers to our whole idea of not floating the gun. If you are in a situation where you need to deploy the pistol while you're in contact with someone, you can't just float the gun because it's not indexed off your body, so you don't know where the rounds are going to go. Uh, During our ECQC, the extreme close quarter concepts, that's the gun focused as opposed to the knife focused version of the class. We develop that skill of retention shooting um, on the range with live fire drills, and it validates what we're trying to get them to do. So they know exactly where the round is going to go each time. It's repeatable, men, we put on helmets, T-guns, and after a good 10-hour training day, we have them fight each other and see if all the stuff that they just practiced on live fire and then practice dry worked against legitimate pressure and resistance. And that pressure is definitely the biggest failing of most combatives programs. They don't test what they're preaching to people. So even if it did work, if you don't test it under pressure and resistance, you'll walk away going, eh, I don't know. I guess it could be good. Maybe not. Unless you legitimately test it, you're not going to have any confidence that it'll work. And the best time to test it is not when you need it the most. That's for sure.
Yeah, makes perfect sense. Um, and here's a question I wanted to ask you is, and because that, as an instructor, this is something that I always, want to hear
Mhm.
how other people approach that. The only thing that is real is reality. So the only thing that is absolutely 100% reality is when you actually end up in a violent situation and, it goes hands on. All the rest is training, which is always going to be a compromise, an approximation, and basically you're trying to get as close as you can sometimes. But very often you isolate certain things, like, okay, we're obviously, it wouldn't be real unless we're using live blades and, live rounds. We're not going to do that. So there's a compromise there. One of the compromises that I see is that people go too far with the restrictions, and then it becomes like a little bit woo woo,
Yes,
spacey out
yes.
there. There's always a risk of that. And the main reason why I wanted to talk to you is because a few weeks ago I shared a video on my social media about this. This is a BJJ guy. I don't know him, a big strong black
Mhm.
guy, and he asked the question, "Did I die or something?" in his video. And he's on the ground. There's a girl with a knife, with a practice knife. She's coming at him, and she stabs the living crap out of him and cuts him and so on. You see where it lands, so that's, anatomically speaking, that's not a good thing. What's going on? Eventually he can, and he's scooting, on his butt towards her, grabs her, eventually grabs the knife and cuts her throat supposedly with it and so on. And I'm like, "Oh, dude, I mean, you took a lot of damage right there, and it's not like in the video games you've got 2 health bars, and it's only when it reaches 0 that you get knocked out. No, 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 no. Every cut, that is blood that is seeping out of you. If it's arteries that are hit, it's going very fast. If tendons and muscle fibers are cut, that arm suddenly doesn't work as well anymore, or even not at all. So, and your body might go into shock very rapidly as well. There's a lot of stuff going on that you cannot simulate. It's impossible to simulate.
Yeah.
Now, and that is one aspect of my question. So we have to leave that out. So it's, how do you stay away from Fantasyland? The other aspect of that question is, um, you know, I mean, I'd like to talk about your BJJ background a little bit later, but you're a black belt under
Andre Galvao.
Andre,
Yeah.
goddammit, fucking Galvao. It's just like, he is like a legend in the sport. Um, I just shared this video of what you guys posted on one of the ShivWorks, I think the Instagram page, and I shared it. And I said, "Look, here, guys, here it is." And it's a really short clip of two guys. They're suited up, and it's like I think the title was "It's Getting Spicy."
I put
and
that
they
up
go at
like
each
two
other.
days
And
ago, 3 days ago. Yeah.
yeah, I saw that and I'm like, that's my point. Goes to the ground, very nice throw, a little bit of a scramble, and they sort of end up in
Hmm.
Kesakatame,
Hmm.
sort of. And the one guy starts shooting and the other guy starts
Yep.
stabbing. And I'm like, right. So this here is my point. If you approach um, violence outside of the combative sports arena, where we're talking about self-defense, lethal force, potentially, and so on. So nothing to do with
Hmm.
sports. If you come it from a purely sports BJJ background, you do not account for weapons at all. It's just not an issue. Doesn't mean it's bad.
Well, sport.
It's just that it's a
Yep.
sport, and that's fine. And what I
Hmm.
saw, I mean, you should read the comments that I get underneath, those kind of
I
videos. Like
know.
people are, oh, do this and that, or yeah, but in real life he would
Yep.
have done and blah
Yep.
blah blah. I'm like, that is not my issue. The issue is that every art or system is a tool. It's really good at certain things, maybe less so at other things, and that's fine. There's plenty of tools out there. But if you have a tool that is hyper specialized in a certain environment, it's always going to have to be adapted towards reality when you want to take it outside of that environment. And that is what I saw you guys do for a long time.
Yes.
Like really talk, okay, you're in neon belly position. He's got his arm here, he's got that arm there. So you don't want him to be able to go for whatever he has in his waistband or and so on. And this is how you handle it. So the specifics of assuming that a weapon might be deployed, even if you don't see it, if you in real life outside of competition, if you don't assume that he might have a weapon, that is one mighty risk that you're taking with your life. You're actually betting your
Yes.
life on that.
Yeah.
So how do you guys manage that, the reality of it, not ending up too far away from it by limitations, and at the same time when you have a lot of people coming from a sports background, and that was my case in the beginning as well. How do you get them outside of that mindset of like, okay, there are um, everybody's bored of me saying that, but the one of my few claims to fame is that I invented Randy's law, which is the differences are just as important as the similarities. And I'll put a link in the show notes about that. And then the differences in BJJ for self-defense and for sports, they're there. There's a lot more similarities, but those differences are actually very, very important. So long
It's a
introduction. Your
well,
thoughts, sir?
it's a very broad broad statement with a couple questions peppered in there. So we'll try to narrow it down, which is what I think the first thing you have to do in developing a good combatives or self-defense curriculum is narrow down the focus and try to identify the specific problem that you're trying to defeat. So if we first think about restriction for safety. So we're going to do some sort of evolution or a drill, and I'll go into the difference between the two. We have to have some constraints just for safety because we can't keep training if we keep hurting each other. And there are going to be limitations on how hard we can go, what we can do, what we can allow and can't allow, just based on safety factors. And it can actually create some blind spots in the development of the program. And we have a very recent, prominent example that has come to light, but it's been a problem for a long time. So you might have seen we put up a video of us reaching inside the holster with our finger and pulling the trigger on people's gun. I had a friend of mine in San Diego police who they were arresting a suspect. The suspect reached back into the holster and was able to stick their finger inside and discharge the weapon. No one got hurt, but there was a big gap in the actual holster that allows a finger to go inside. Now, Craig's been doing this 20 something years. We have a group message with a bunch of other senior instructors, and all of them have 20 plus years of combatives experience. And almost all of them said, yeah, I've never seen that happen, or I didn't know that was an issue. And there's a lot of people, once we posted it, said, I had a guy this happen at my agency, that happened at my agency. And when you look at how is this happening across the country over the years, but it's never manifested in front of people who are training combatives all the time. It's because as soon as someone's finger starts to get into the trigger well during training, we stop it because we don't want to break a finger. So that problem has never been seen, at least to a large extent, within a training environment just due to the constraints of safety. So we ended up with this blind spot that if someone has a weapons mounted light in a particular type of holster, anyone would be able to shove their finger inside and shoot your gun, even though it's still in the holster, which to me is that means that's a holster design issue. I think that's a technological problem, not a retention problem. But nevertheless, that's something we probably should have seen, but we didn't, just due to the constraints of safety. Now, you have drills and evolutions, and we separate the two uh, purposefully by design because we want to try to nail down what's the purpose, what's our learning goal. If I'm trying to see how a specific technique works, or I'm trying to assess your ability to execute a certain task under stress, I'm going to severely restrict the options and I'm very carefully going to control all the variables. For example, one of our um, drills that we do is I'll put you against the wall and a person's going to stand behind you. They're going to touch your shoulder. When we say go, they're going to hit you in the back of the head. You're going to have to stay conscious, stay standing, and then try to deploy a weapon under a barrage of punches. Now, the bad guy can only punch. He can't grab onto you. He's not a grappler. It's just a barroom mauling. Now, that's not to say that every encounter you have where someone hits you in the face means that you have the green light to stab or shoot them. All this does is, under a significant amount of pressure and resistance, can you execute the content that you were instructed on during the day? By doing that under pressure, it's going to validate the day's training, and you're going to walk away going, if I need to, I know I can execute that technique. There's no framing or context for that. We have evolutions like the full spectrum evolution Sunday morning that we do, uh, where there's decision making. So you have a gun carried on you concealed. There's two other people. One of them may or may not be inserted into the evolution, but the guy is going to approach you and you need to manage the unknown contact. And they can do whatever they want, however they feel. So they might come up to you and say, do you know how to get back to the highway? And if you scream at them and it pisses them off and they think they can hit you in the face, they have permission to do that. You might want to go up to them and rob them. And if you're able to say something that makes them laugh, or maybe you say, I just lost my son. I'm struggling, man. I really want to help you. I can't. And it takes the wind out of their sail. They can't get anything going. We might call it there. Uh, so some of them go physical and some of them don't. But that simulation is probably the closest thing we can get to a real world event. And the goal of all those simulations is to give you the benefit of experience without the consequence of real life. So there is still safety that limits it, but those experiences are real. They're not real in the sense that you're going to die or you're going to get stabbed, but the emotional anchoring that you have under pressure when you get knocked to the ground or you pull someone to the ground because you're a jujitsu guy and a second guy comes in and that second guy takes your gun while you're trying to fight the first guy and you get shot with your own pistol. That emotional anchoring is going to stick with you. You're going to remember that. You're going to remember, maybe I should have stayed on my feet, maintained good posture, improved my head positioning, controlled the hands more. So though it is a simulation, I think the experience is real, it's genuine. And as long as everyone's playing it authentic to them, I mean, some of them can get fairly emotional. A lot of them are just hilarious, you know. But depending on the acting level, some of them can be fairly emotional. Uh, you had said, how do we stay away from fantasy? And I think that's the easiest way you do it. We start every training that we do by framing the problem, and that is an overview of criminal assaults. What do they tend to look like? What's the trends that you see within them based on our own personal lived experience or experience that we've stolen from other people or observed from other people? Craig will talk about he was robbed at gunpoint 9 times in those 2 years of being undercover. I was robbed one time in Brazil. I was robbed one time when I was a kid, and I've been attacked before growing up. So we have experience with criminal violence that we can draw from to come up with a little bit of conclusions on what they tend to look like. You can probably bet that these things are going to happen up close. The guy's going to get close enough to touch you if they want something from you or they want to hurt you. These things are probably going to have some level of unequal initiative, whether it's you're able to read that person's body language correctly, assess that he has violent intent, and you make the first move, or you don't read it correctly and they surprise you, they take the initiative and they make the first move. Someone is ambushing someone else. And then you're going to have a few others that we go through the course with potential of more than one guy, but I want to touch on the weapons. Um, Everything in the real world is a drag race to a weapon, and you should always treat it as such, because you never know what is going to set that violent interaction from social violence, where you both had a gentleman's agreement to throw hands, into that guy is trying to take my life, and I need to, so I'm going to have to take his life. You don't know where that line is unless you signed a fight contract saying we're not going to actually kill each other. You don't know what's in that guy's head or heart. And at any moment, he might decide, I don't think I can take another hit. I'm going to stab him. So that framing informs the techniques that we use or don't use during the coursework. It also narrows the techniques that you're going to use. We're not going to focus on head control. Why? Because if I focus on head control, I'm not controlling the hands. And if we consider everything out in the real world as a drag race to a weapon and I don't control his hands, I can assume that's a hand going for a weapon on his waist or my waist. So by framing your problem right at the start of training, I think that really helps push it away from any type of fantasy land. And as far as IG stuff, I all of the Instagram things are just they're eye candy for marketing, essentially. There's only so much you can pull from a 10-second video, especially if you're uninformed as to what's actually happening. So quite often people will see one of our videos and there'll be one guy get shot with a sim round and they keep going and the other guy stabbing him. And so you got one guy getting shot, one guy getting stabbed, and they keep going and going and going, and then we call it. And then in the comments they'll say, well, that dude got stabbed, so he's dead. Or that guy got shot once, so that would have been the end of it. But first, if we look at the real world events, we see people get shot all the time, multiple times, in places that count, and they still keep coming. It could be that true believer, they're extra determined. Maybe they got drugs or alcohol, something like that. They're impaired, so um, they stay in the fight a lot longer than they should. Same with knives. I think the majority of stabbing victims that I came across as a cop, those people drove themselves to the hospital with 37 stab wounds covered in blood, and then they die from infection 3 or 4 days later. So there's no predictable physiological response that you're going to get with a gun or a knife, absent you know, 5 to 7 rounds, nipple to nipple at the edge of the collarbone or in the ocular window. Other than that, we can't guarantee how people's body is going to react. And a lot of the stoppages of fights are psychological, not physical. So letting these play out, even though someone's getting stabbed multiple times or they're getting shot multiple times or both, there's a real world benefit to that. That might be the way it goes down. As far as the simulation side of it, there's a lot of benefit from there too. I don't want someone to just bang once and quit, because if that doesn't stop it, I want them to be able to fight through it. If the knife comes out, I want them to be able to fight under pressure a knife that's trying to be thrust into them. If we stop after one thrust, after one stab, they're never going to get the time under pressure and resistance to develop the skill required to defend against the knife. So I might let you get stabbed 20 or 30 times until I see you get your head on right, you attach to the blade, and you start making good decisions. I'm I don't care if you win or you lose. That's not the point of the exercise. The point of the exercise is start making better decisions than you otherwise would under stress and resistance. So we let these go until we feel that the instructional value has expired. And when is that? I don't know. Each one's different, and you only get that through repetition of watching them over and over and over. And that's when you hear us yell break. Okay, I have extracted as much training value as possible. We'll break it here and we're going to debrief what happened. This is what went well. This is what went bad. These are some trends that we've been seeing throughout the day, etc. And we try to unpack what happened with the people. And then, um, yeah, framing the rules. I already said that. So that's a bigger answer to a big topic.
No, it's a great answer. Thank you. And I really like that approach. And it's something that I also have a lot of stuff online, instructional material and so on. You post a quick video and then people go all nuts over it. That always happens. And it's, it's normal. I can't really fault people for that at all. But the thing is that you as an instructor have to know, like, okay, well, actually, what we're doing, there's this entire thing behind that that is well thought out, that is, born from experience and training and so on. It's not like we're just doing a whatever drill and then, okay, we'll see what happens. That's not what's going on. Um, the way I see it is that a lot of people, can't really comprehend that something can be as complex, like I said before, as violence compared to any other field of study. And then when you look at training that you do in other fields, similar things happen. Is that you go to a class or a course or a workshop to let you practice, and then you have to perform, and then they just let you mess up until like, oh, I'm kind of stuck here. Okay, try this. Okay, let's do that drill again. Let's do that free flowing exercise again, and you have to fight your way through it. And the if the only purpose of doing some pressure testing is that the student needs to win against his opponent, well, what is he learning?
Yes.
It's going to be extremely limited. And the way I would phrase it is, and when I teach from what I see, it's like, look, you want to end it as quickly as possible, because the longer it goes on, the longer there's the bigger the odds of something going wrong. So, but you want to be able to go as long as it takes. You don't know what that will
Yeah.
be. That can be 2 seconds, that can be 2 minutes, that can be longer. You have no idea. So it's I've been doing on my Patreon violence analysis videos this is my 7th year. So every month a new analysis video comes out. I've seen, I can't count how many thousands of videos, because before I pick one to analyze, I discard a lot of them. Um, and it's something that is extremely hard to explain to people. Like, look, this is what you see. Now, as an instructor, you and I, Brian, we will see different things. So when I talk about one thing, that doesn't mean that I'm discounting all the other
Yes.
things.
Very true.
It's that I don't want to talk for 5 hours on this 2-minute video to explain every single little detail. But not because, just because I don't doesn't mean I didn't see it. It's just that I'm extracting this lesson. And this is one of my instructors, the late Bob Orlando's, when he would teach the seminar, he was a computer programmer,
Oh,
very extremely
yeah.
organized. And he would show, he was one of the first to teach, using principles, like 30 plus years ago. And I said, look, this technique here may not be the best technique, but it illustrates the principle that I'm teaching you very, very well.
I
And
do
if you
this.
understand the principle, you can find other techniques. So anyway, I'm ranting a
That's
little bit,
funny that you say
but
that. Just that last part specifically. Everything we do is is based off principles and concepts, and absent a few specific techniques like a bicep tie or wrist tie, underhook, overhook, which those are hard and fast doctrinal rules. You must be able to apply a wrist tie or strip a wrist tie. You must be able to apply a bicep, an underhook, or an overhook, and counter those if someone does them against you. And there's only a few ways to do that. So those are very hard and fast rules. We introduce an idea that we call in-fight weapons access. the whole concept itself is before you go for the weapon, you have to control the arm of the adversary that's closest to the weapon before you draw it. That's the concept. Now, the delivery method for you to practice it might be I force you to do an arm drag to your support side, freeing your primary arm to grab the weapon. That is just a delivery vessel for the concept. The concept is always control the hand closest to the gun. This is a way to meet the goals of that concept. And we're very big on giving the heuristic so that in the moment you can find a way to make it work. And we try really hard to um, with our delivery of information, we try really hard to make sure that we're giving you the how it works rather than the this is the only way to make it work. That way, in the moment, you can more or less figure it out. It works really good for short coursework that we do, the 2 day classes, that sort of stuff. And we see people who have never done any grappling or striking or fighting in any way, and they go into the evolution and they do good. They're able to get a person off of them who maybe they might be a normal average computer nerd, and they're able to get a blue belt off of them. We didn't just suddenly make them jujitsu blue belts. We gave them the principles, we tested it under pressure, and now we're validating it through an evolution. And they found a way to make it work because we gave them the here's the goal, and they find a path to get to it. So we're definitely much more of we think instruction is best delivered through concepts and principles, delivered through a handful of techniques as potential ways to achieve those goals. Understanding you can make it happen in a lot of different ways. And as long as you stay within your left and right lateral limits, you'll probably find success. You're talking about those real world violent incidences and seeing a bunch of them and trying to decide which one you're going to do on your debrief videos. And I have the same issue. I'll put every now and then some actual violence onto the Instagram channel. For one reason, those don't get violations and they get a ton of views. Everyone likes seeing someone get stabbed, and apparently Instagram's okay with it. So if I put a training video with a fake knife, that one usually gets flagged. But if I put a video of someone actually
Really?
getting stabbed and there's blood, those never get violations. So,
Okay, can I
yeah,
interrupt you
yeah,
for a second? Because this is interesting. I started doing that late last year. I posted a video of a robbery that was basically, foiled by people in a
yeah,
car, and I got like a few
yep,
million views right away. I'm like, okay, this is what Instagram wants me to
yes,
do. So I started doing that. Instagram said, "Awesome, Wim, keep doing that for the next 3, 4 months." And then all of a sudden, they would hit me with violation after violation of just remixing videos from Instagram that they
yeah,
allowed. And when I added my comments to it, like, okay, watch out for this, or you have to maintain this and da da da. Like, no, you are encouraging bullying,
yep,
you're doing this and that. And then I'm like, what the hell is going on? And then after a while, I started, I deleted all those posts, and then I filed a complaint. And then all of a sudden, they hit me with one with like every day. They hit me with like 3, 4
yeah.
violations. So I'm like, dude, God, I mean, come on. And then I escalated it. It's like, guys, what's going on? And now they more or less leave me alone.
Nice.
So I haven't been posting any training
Yeah.
videos, just real life encounters. And now it seems to be fine. And you get the opposite.
Well, I get the if I post training videos, I'll get violations. If I post real life violence, then I don't get anything. It's really
Crazy.
frustrating. But so I
Uh,
try just like you. I'll go through them, and of course, people send us a ton of them. I do all the ShivWorks social media, website, email, all that stuff. If you're talking to someone from ShivWorks, it's 99% you're talking to uh, this guy. So. I'll go through these videos and it's hard to decide, I don't want to be exploitive over someone's tragedy. I try to avoid the cop ones. If I can't find a lesson from it, hey, he should have controlled the hand right here, or here is a very obvious um, teaching point that I can pull from the lessons and the content that we use, then I don't like to post it. And that goes back to the whole real life experience thing. If you have real life experience that you can pull cogent, teachable message from, then I think that helps your content. If you just want to sit around and tell war stories during your course of instruction, I think your students are gonna find themselves really, really bored because no one's here for the Brian show. They want to see what Brian can do for them to make them better. That's what you're here to do. So we don't tell a lot of war stories or experience stories. We tell a few, but they have to be relevant and really add to whatever we're trying to teach. You talked about the debriefs. Uh, this I don't often get to talk to anyone about the instructor side of stuff, but outside of pairing people up who are, because we don't do random pairings. Craig and I intentionally choose who's going to go against who for specific reasons. Outside of that, the debriefs are the most difficult thing to do because we have 20 simulations. I don't have 2 hours to debrief every single person. So did I see, maybe I saw six things. Okay, one of those is probably going to happen again because it's a common mistake, so I'll ignore that one. Uh, then I try to prioritize what's the most impactful, what's the least impactful, and then you try to summarize it as best as you can in this short little snippet. Hey, here's what I saw. I think that we could do this better, or this was done really good. Thoughts, move on. And it's very, very difficult to limit how much you say. And it also speaks to corrections. You see your student um, executing the technique, you're probably going to see six or seven things that they do wrong. But if you point all of those out, he's not going to be able to fix any of them. So maybe you ignore all of them but one, and you say, hey, I want you to focus on keeping your head up and not looking at the ground when you're doing this. And you just keep focusing on that. And then once they get good with that, then you add the next one. You're also doing this. Try correcting this. And I think that helps with your time management, and it definitely helps with how much they can receive and then exercise in a given time period, not overloading them with information. I really like the debrief stuff though. Just thinking about it and how do you improve the debriefs to be constructive. Yeah.
And it's also good for, becoming a better instructor because that you really have to think all the time and analyze, and it keeps you sharp. And I'll tell you what I like to do is I like to stick to three things because most people can remember three things, but not
Yeah.
more. And that's fine. I mean, I'm sure I'd be the same after doing a heavy, heavy pressure testing drill, fully adrenalized. And then you've got some guy talking like, well, this, and this. Or I might be tired from 2 days of doing extremely, fatiguing physical training. I like to do three things. And then usually if at all possible, I'll start with a quick win. Like, okay, do this, and this is going to solve like a bunch of problems very quickly. Like what you said, if you stop looking at the ground, it's going to fix a lot of stuff for you, and that's easy to remember, and let's say relatively easy to do. Um, and then I'll the second one will be a priority. It's like, okay, this is like a big gaping hole in your game, or this is actually very problematic. You need to fix this. He might have done five of those, but I'll just pick the one that I think for that person is the most important. Uh, and whatever the context is that we're in, all that is going to determine which one I pick. But that's going to be like, you need to fix this. It's okay. Everybody makes mistakes. However, this one can get you killed, or this one will leave you wide open for X, Y, Z. And the third one is going to vary on like the day itself. Like, what are we doing? Where are we? And so on. Keep it as much as possible relevant to whatever it was that we just did or trained or drilled. And I found that, again, this is after 30 plus years of teaching, I found that approach tends to work for the most people. Is because you're not putting them down, because I start with a quick win and explain like, this is easy, right? Just don't stop looking down. Okay, I get it. And then you can start practicing, and very quickly they will make progress. And then you also give one that is actually like, okay, dude, here you have a big problem, and I'm going to give you the tool to fix it, but you need to fix it. This is important. From my perspective, some people might backfire on them if the ego gets involved. But I think as an instructor, that conveys that you take it seriously and you take them seriously, and you're committed to making them better. Because we're talking about self-defense, especially when we're talking about law enforcement, military, and so on. These guys put their lives on the line, so you don't want them to have these big gaping holes in their game. Um, and then the last one, like I said, is just make it relevant so that it's clear that this is not just generally speaking. This is like, okay, this is why we did the drill, and this is one thing, one takeaway that you can get out of this, what we just did. That makes you actually better at that. Anyway, that's my approach.
No one remembers their wins. So despite it, well, especially with the simulations we do, you might have a guy who there's no way to justify the actions he took. A guy came up to him and he said, "Hey, bud, you got the time?" And the other dude shoots him in the head. That's a murder. So you kind of, when those happen, and they do happen from time to time, you know, people have nerves, performance anxiety, what have you. They make the mistake and they know it, they feel it. So you have to be real sensitive and you have to understand the public vulnerability that they are showing, especially in the formats that we do, because everyone is working in front of everyone else and they're going to justify what they did in front of everyone else. I think those are the most powerful experiences, the losses, those ones stick with you. I don't remember all the fights that I had with people that I won, but I can definitely remember the ones where I lost or I didn't do good or I missed something that I shouldn't have missed. Uh, those last. It also speaks to maintaining engagement with all the people that you're trying to instruct. We do the name game. I know there's some instructors out there, they'll have all the students introduce themselves, and then right afterwards, they're able to name each person. I don't have that type of memory. I have to touch you. I have to work with you. I have to interact back and forth a few times. And over the course of the 10-hour training day that we have together, by the end of it, if I can remember your name, then I know I spent enough time with you. If I don't remember your name, then I know I didn't do my job in terms of engaging with you to understand your ability and what you need. And if you're asking, this is what they do. If you're asking me to safely pair you with another person who you probably don't know, put gloves on and helmets and try to fight each other as hard as you can, uh, you should expect my ability to stay engaged and judge your emotional control, your physical ability, and then your technical ability. So that I think that's a big responsibility that us as instructors have towards the people we're teaching. And I think that a lot of guys don't take that seriously. And there's a lot of people in the industry, if you could call it that, because anyone can just start a training company. But there's a lot of people in the industry. They see what we do, try to copy it, and they'll just have random pairings. Hey, you and you, go fight. There's a lot more to it than just randomly picking people. And then when it comes time to debrief the two of them, with one of them having just committed a legitimate murder, you're going to have a hard time showing the sensitivity you need to tell that person you just did something really bad and you're going to have to sit with it for a while and spend some time in your own head thinking about the person you are when you don't have a gun or the person you are when you are carrying a gun. That's a
Yeah.
challenge.
Well, I think you really touched on an important point here when it comes to these kind of pressure testing, scenario training, and so on. Um, I talked to Peyton Quinn about that a long time ago, who is, I think, one of the first to actually, start doing scenario training at his Ramcat center in Colorado. And then I talked to Bill Kipp, who is one of his lead instructors, who said like the main thing I see people think it's all about the Bullet Man suit. He says it's the software, it's the training itself. That's the key. The Bullet Man suit, the protective gear allows you to hit full force. Yes, but that's not the issue. And I think that's a really big deal when it comes to, force on force training is that, yes, we can do fancy stuff now because we can hit harder and it's a lot of fun. But yes, but you're supposed to be learning something in a very, very specific way. And I was there at Peyton Center a few years ago, and they were doing a Kobayashi Maru drill from the old Star Trek. And people look up Kobayashi Maru, and you'll find it in even the new series, in the new movies. They cover it as well. So you know how that ends. And Peyton said, like, there's one guy who beat the drill, but he basically shot too soon. He basically committed murder because there was no way that he
Yeah.
was legally or morally justified in pulling the firearm and shooting, and everybody basically fails that drill, basically. So anyway, I want to come back a little bit to my earlier question. You mentioned that you get a lot of guys who maybe haven't done anything yet, and then they're kind of like flipping off a blue belt off them. How about guys with a bunch of training? Do you get those as well, like combat sports and so on? And I'll quickly give some background to my question. I just the other day I saw a video of a security guard. He gets sucker punched by a guy, doesn't knock him out, and I think he shoves him or punches him, and then he does a beautiful spinning back kick and knocks the guy out. Just beautiful spinning heel kick in the guy's face, and that's it. It's done. I have seen the opposite as well. A guy doing a beautiful high kick, and the other guy dodges or blocks it and kicks the guy basically to a bloody pulp. So I've done high kicks myself, knocking people out, and it's not that it doesn't work; it's that there's a time and a place for it. At my age, with my arthritis, there's no way I'm doing that again. So how do you handle when you get guys with a lot of combat sport training, but then we get back to the differences and similarities things, like, and you see, like, okay, well, actually what you're doing is not wrong, but this is the combat sports aspect, and here are these extra factors that come along that actually can get you killed if you stay within the paradigm of combat sports. So how do you handle that when somebody does that? You don't want to obviously, you know, damage their ego too much. You don't want it to become this contest where it's just butting heads, but you do want to teach them correctly. So your thoughts on
I
that?
think it's sort of a question of who comes to these trainings. We get people who have never done a physical thing in their entire life. We get people who are unbelievably overweight. We get people who are super tiny and malnutritioned. We get guys who are high level, world class jujitsu black belts, world champions even. We have um, Cole Miller. He's a UFC fighter. So we have special tier one secret squirrel guys with blurry faces. So it's all over the map, the level of experience, and we can bring them all together, and in the same weekend, they can all get good training. And I think a few reasons are all of our stuff is very, very basic foundational movements and techniques that you need and are pretty ubiquitous across all forms of fighting. One of them being staying vertical. There's only a few systems out there that teach you how to stay vertical well, but all of them are going to come down to having good posture. If you can have good posture, and that means that structural stability from the back of your head to the bottom of your tailbone, bent knees, slight lean forward, all that stuff. If you are good at all that, you're going to be harder to knock down. So we start with building that. As far as having the guys with a ton of experience come in and dealing with those egos, the most ego that you're going to get is the the police or the secret squirrel people who are disinterested. They're a little ambivalent. They think they know everything. My background being what it is in jujitsu and my ability to step in and do what I can do to the average guy I come across, that helps a long way of building those ethos, pathos, and logos of, yeah, I get it. I'll listen to this guy. I think that plays into it a lot. Um, but the coursework itself as we go through, starting with properly framing what violence, what potential real world violence is going to look like, then going into here's the techniques that we're going to use to address that framing that we just laid out for you. And then the final thing being, we're going to validate the training we gave you to see if it can work under conditions that simulate the initial framing. When you have that progression of instruction, everyone does okay with it. people who come in that do have a ton of training, one of the things we like to say to them is this is going to be an interesting lens for you to look at your skill. Because I can get a guy who's a world champion black belt. Obviously, he can fight. He just needs a good reframing of the problem in order to operate within this environment, that being the real world. And a good way that I've found to help them wrap their head around it is everything outside of the gym is just a different rule set. You go to different tournaments, some you can do leg locks, some you can't, some you can reap the knee, some you can't, some you can strike, some you can't. You're able to perform in all of those tournaments without any problem. It's the same thing out in the real world. There are a set of rules that you need to follow. And if you understand the rules really well, your decision-making tree becomes very efficient, and you can apply your already known and honed skills to that world. But you just need the reframing. So those people who come to us need the reframing. A lot of, let's say, the computer nerd, when he comes to us, that guy probably doesn't need any social literacy. He knows when he's about to get beat up, and he's probably really good at talking his way out of it. He spent his whole life cracking jokes to avoid being beat up by the jocks. All he needs is a little bit of technique. I don't need to teach him how to talk. He's good at that part. So it's interesting. The really, really physically skilled guys tend to not be so great at talking. They're poor orators. And then you have the nerd who grew up getting swirlies. He's great at talking. He needs a little bit of physical skill, and then he can sucker punch anyone. But it's definitely a balance between the two. And then assessing where they have strong points and weak points between all of them is how we can safely pair them up when we get into the more high liability levels of training. Addressing kicks, and it's not kicks specifically, but people will say, I like this technique, insert X, and we'll say the teep kick. Um, the teep kick is great. I've seen it work a ton. I've seen it work in real life against guys with weapons in their hands and get knocked to the ground and got dogpiled on and put in cuffs. It can work. The problem is it just because it works once or twice or three times, is that the most effective, efficient, and safest way to handle that problem? What's the consequence if it fails? Well, in the example of a kick, you just turned yourself into a monopod. And if you miss, or if they catch your foot, or you connect, but it wasn't strong and you don't get the reaction that you want, now you're balancing on one leg and you're not on a predictable surface that's expressly designed for your comfort and safety, like a mat room. You might be outside on gravel where it just rained. You might be in the bar and there's broken glass and spilt beer on the ground, or you're outside and it's icy and you have unpredictable footwear. There's so many weird situations that can happen that can impact your mobility or your ability to stay balanced. I don't think taking one leg off the floor is a good idea out in the real world. Can it happen? Sure. Couldn't you get away with it? Yeah, until you don't. It's the same with shooting from the back of the stack for all our team-based guys. If you're in a stack in a formation and you're at the very back of it and you see a bad guy up front, you can't take a shot. You'll get away with it until one of the other guys turns his head out to look and you shoot him in the back of the head. Don't do it. That's a dumb idea. Uh, that's how we look at a lot of techniques. If I grab your head, that's great control. I can really impact your posture negatively and bend you to my will if I get a good strong collar tie or a plum. Um, but when I do that, I'm I'm no longer controlling your hands, and that's when you're going to go for something that's really going to hurt. And that's how we
Yeah.
address all of that.
Yeah. It's funny that you mentioned it from, shooting from the stack is that because there was this incident, I think it was in South
Yes.
Africa a while
Yes, I
ago
know
to the two
exactly
police officers.
what you're talking about.
And we're not going to get too graphic about it, but just like I think one of them is kneeling and one behind them, they're both shooting, and one behind them just moves and just basically shoots his partner in the back
Yep.
of the head because he moves at the wrong
Yep.
time. And like he's gone. The man, I mean, split
Yep.
second, and bullet lands, and that man is no longer with us. So it's the kind of stuff that needs to be addressed in training, obviously. But it's real life can be gruesome. I mean, I sometimes get still very shocked reactions to some of the things that I write or post or that we say in the podcast. I'm like, folks, we're talking about real world violence. It's never pretty. It's not a John Wick movie.
Man,
It's
yeah,
real life can be really, really, really
it
gruesome.
speaks to
Um,
urgency and resolution. A lot of people in
yeah,
training, they end up, and this is a problem. I mean, still, I have it because I'm a, jujitsu nerd. You'll um, train with knives. The other guy has a knife, you have a knife, and go. You'll spend too much time trying to get the perfect position under control when you might be able to just push his face away and get your knife out and start stabbing. It's an
yeah,
ugly draw, but you got the knife out first, and now you're stabbing him and he's not stabbing you. Guys who train a lot tend to have this leniency towards playing in the clinch instead of resolving the clinch. The best, the most effective way that we've found to build urgency as people is introduce the knife. Um, each of you are going to have a knife, or sometimes we'll just do one, but one of you is going to have a knife. And as soon as the knife comes out, you reset, switch. And quickly people realize the knife always comes out. And it develops this sense of urgency in people as soon as they lock up that they don't want to be there anymore. So the moment I've stabilized this clinch, I need to start looking to resolve it and escape to the back or tie up both of their limbs so I can deploy something of my own. And it kind of gets rid of the idea of playing in the clinch. Absent your cop,
all right.
cop might have to, you're going to have to control someone. You can't just run away. That's the job you signed up for.
If you're a cop and you're in an escalating situation, there's at least one gun around yours. And usually it's more than a gun. It might be a taser, might be a knife, might be something else, but there's weapons involved. And I mean, not that long ago there was this thing, and I think it was in Latin America somewhere, I forget where this lady, she's arrested, she's cuffed behind her back, and she basically reaches around and grabs the gun out of the holster of one of the officers and starts
Yeah,
shooting. And she's like in this
yeah,
awkward positions with her hands, and it's like doesn't matter. There's lead flying
yep.
all over the place. Like, yeah, crazy stuff happens, and it kind of matters that you can control the
Yeah,
hands.
yep.
Brian, we've been going for about an hour. I know you don't have unlimited time, so I would like to go on to the second half where we go to Patreon, because my patrons were very excited that you came on to the podcast and they have a bunch of questions for
Okay.
you. So we have to do this again another time because I wanted to talk to you about, your way to becoming a black
Oh
belt
yeah,
under
yeah,
Andre
yeah.
Galvao. Some of your, you've had
Hmm.
deployments when you were in the military to Iraq and Afghanistan. I'd love to talk to you about that as well, but I don't want to, take on too much of your time. So let's do that another time. Where can people reach you? So I'll add that for folks who are new to the podcast. Go to wimsblog.com and then you do / and type in the number of the episode. This brings you to the show notes page where I put all the links and so on. So, but just if you could tell me where people can reach you, I'll add it there.
ShivWorks official is the Instagram channel. Anything you message on there, I'm gonna get it. And that's the best way
All
to get a hold of
right,
me.
that's great. All right. So, Brian, thank you so much. Folks, thank you for listening. As always, you can support the podcast by becoming a patron, because patrons get access to the second part, which is where Brian will take your messages and questions. And that's what we're going to do now. Okay. Thanks for listening, everybody. Take care.